Hello, everybody. It's Monday, the 13th of October, 2023. The word gerontocracy seems to be on everyone's minds these days. One Substacker suggests that gerontocracy, the rule of the very old, is everywhere. Old people don't seem to have an end game. They don't seem to quite know when to step down and hand over the reins to younger people. It's certainly true in the United States, where the Democrats are unleashing a House primary challenge in the war on the gerontocracy. And it's also true in Europe. One man who's all too familiar with gerontocracies and also, perhaps more importantly, with end games is my guest today. He knows how to step down. Everyone knows about Jeffrey Archer. There's only one Jeffrey Archer. He sold 275 million copies of his books. He's had other distinguished careers, including in politics. And interestingly enough, he has just come out with what he calls his last book, and it's appropriately called Endgame. Jeffrey Archer is joining us from his flat, or what Americans call apartment, in central London. Jeffrey, congratulations on Endgame.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew, and nice to be back on your show.
What advice would you give to old people, particularly old politicians in Europe and the United States, who don't have an end game, Jeffrey?
Well, you've got to decide at some point. And this took a natural end for Endgame because it was the 8th in the series of the William Warwick books. And he started life, as you know, as a constable on the beat in Nothing Ventured. And he's come all the way through to the final book when he's a commander and he's put in charge of the 2012 Olympics. It just happened neatly for me that he was 55 years old, that he was in his big job as a commander. And I love my sport, and I particular athletics. And so I went over to Monaco to see Sebastian Coe and said, did anything go wrong at the Olympics? Because the image, quite rightly, is that the London Olympics was a massive success. And he said, well, I'm not the person to ask, Jeffrey. The person to ask is Commander Bob Broadhurst, who was actually the commander-in-chief in charge of security. So I flew back to London and saw the commander, and I thought he might say, I'm sorry, Jeffrey, I can't say anything. But it's 14 years later. So he said, yes, I can tell you there were 12 minor incidents that would have caused the odd headline, but there were 2 major incidents. One would have closed the opening ceremony, and one would have had to clear the stadium on the 3rd day of the athletics. So I took his 14, Andrew, and I put them into Endgame, and I put 7 of my own. And you have to decide when you get to the end which are real and which are figments of my imagination.
Jeffrey, I was actually in London last week, and I stayed out in Stratford just by the old Olympic Stadium. It's now relatively old, more than 12, 13 years old. Britain has changed dramatically since 2012. Tell me, in your view, whether those changes have been for the better or the worse.
Oh, unquestionably for the worst. There's a lot of people who think, Andrew, that 2012 was almost a peak, because they do perceive, and rightly so, that the Olympics held in London was a great success. Since then, every nation's had the same problem, yours included. We were meant to work until 65, collect a gold watch, retire, and conveniently die at 70. In Japan last year, they announced that they had over 8,000 people who were over 100 years old. And you've got to think of how many are at 99, 98, 97. You can't, if you retire at 65 and live to 100. The nation cannot finance. So countries like Britain, France, Italy, Germany are close to bankruptcy.
And your story, the novel, the last novel, Endgame, is very much bound up with the British royal family that's also changed dramatically since the Olympics. What do you make of those changes, Geoffrey, and how symptomatic are they of a changing Britain, perhaps for the worse?
Well, I think you have to face the fact, Andrew, that we did have a truly remarkable monarch who devoted her entire life, and a very long life, to the job of being the monarch. And so Elizabeth II, pretty well everyone was the only monarch they could remember, the only person they could remember as the head of state. And I think you saw at her funeral how the British people felt about her. And King Charles is doing a fantastic job, but it's changed. If you talk to the young, they're not as interested in royalty as my generation. And I understand that fully. We're moving in a different world now with Google and Facebook and TikTok and all the other things. The world has changed. And of course, the royal family will have to change with it.
The world has indeed changed, especially in the United Kingdom. You began your career as a young whiz within the British Conservative Party. Of course, you are famously, or you were famously, very close to Mrs. Thatcher. Are you astonished, Geoffrey, by what seems to be not just the decline, perhaps even the end game of the British Conservative Party?
Oh, it's horrifying. Having had, as you kindly pointed out, the privilege of serving Margaret Thatcher for 11 years and then remaining a close friend, because my wife was a chemist, Margaret was a chemist. My wife was at Somerville College, Margaret was at Somerville College. I had the politics, so we were very close to her. And to have had 5 leaders in 6 years is staggering. She'd never believe it. I served 2 prime ministers, Margaret Thatcher and John Major, for 17 years. It's unbelievable we've had 5 in 5 years. So yes, the world has changed. And one of the reasons, Andrew, which won't surprise you, is it's not very attractive to go into politics. It's not a world that attracts the very finest people, I'm afraid, and that's a great loss to any country.
You've given some very interesting interviews recently about Nigel Farage, the head of Reform. I think one of the interviews you gave suggested that you'd given some advice to David Cameron to put him in the Lords to essentially muzzle him. What do you make of Farage?
Well, he's the best mob orator I've ever come across in all my life. I mean, Michael Foot was good, Wedgwood Ben was good, but, Powell was good. But he's the best mob orator I've ever come across. And you point out that 10 years ago I said, and it got in all the papers, that, but mind you, to be fair, Andrew, he was on 0%. Farage was on 0% when I saw the Prime Minister and said, look, he's trouble. He won't disappear. If you put him in the House of Lords and he becomes Lord Farage, you'll have killed him. He will love it. He'll love being a Lord, and he'll just disappear. The Prime Minister, quite rightly, saw that he was on 0%, and we charge on, and now we have him leading the polls. And at the moment, they're saying he would be only 30 seats short of forming a government at the next election.
What kind of Prime Minister do you think he'd make?
Cameron.
No, not Cameron Farage. We know what kind of Prime Minister Cameron was.
I'm so sorry. What sort of Prime Minister would he make? I'm so sorry. I thought you asked which Prime Minister I said that to. There's no way of knowing. He's never held office of any sort at any level. He is a one-man band. You can challenge almost anyone to say, name another person in his party in authority. So the power is with him. Now, when you get elected to be the Prime Minister of our country, as indeed you become the president in your country, you have to form a government. But you've got people who've got great experience in that field. Each party, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, have had several people who over many years have been training for the part. but he hasn't got anybody who's training for the part. So if he suddenly became prime minister overnight and he had to form a cabinet, which is usually 22, 23 people, that would be quite a challenge.
What do you make of Donald Trump, Jeffrey?
I think he's two people. I don't think he's one. I hope to God he's pulled off the Gaza settlement. That would be a wonderful feather in his cap, and he'd have every right to be proud. The other side drives me absolutely bonkers when he can say things like, and casually, that Zelensky declared war on Russia. Does he actually think anyone believes that? Or is there a third of your nation who just accept anything he says is true?
You gave, as I said, an interesting interview to The Independent recently, not just about Farage, but you were looking back at your own career, and they asked you if your interviewer asked if you had any regrets. I wonder if one possible regret might be that you didn't spend enough of your life in politics. I want to come to the writing career, your second career, later. But do you sometimes, as you're falling asleep at night, think to yourself, well, if only I'd spent more of my career in politics, I might have shaped the United Kingdom more effectively, and there may not even be a Nigel Farage now?
I'm very flattered by even the suggestion. I had 11 very happy years with Margaret Thatcher, 7 happy years with John Major. I would love to have held high office. I would love to have gone higher. But almost any politician will tell you that their careers never, unless they make prime minister, they were never really satisfied. I had lunch last week with a former chancellor of the Exchequer, very distinguished politician.
I hope he paid.
Who said that he wasn't satisfied. He had to do more. So I think that's true, actually, Andrew, of every politician. I think probably only Mr. Trump, President Trump, can say that having been president for 4 years and then losing the job and coming back, which has never been done before, truly remarkable.
When it comes to Endgames, the title of your new book, do we all have to accept, Jeffrey, one way or the other? I think some British politician, probably Churchill, said it, that we're all failures, that all careers end in one kind of failure or another. And it's something that we should, in an odd way, celebrate.
Yes, I accept that. And I'm 85 years old now. And I look back on my career and think how lucky I've been, which is the reason I've decided, Andrew, that the next book will be the final book. I don't want to be going on and on and on for the sake of it, fearing the public might rightly say not as good as you used to be. But I came up 6 years ago with an amazing idea for the next book. I've been working on it for 6 years. I think it's bigger than Cain and Abel. I've now got to prove that I can write it, but I won't be attempting another one afterwards. This has been the biggest challenge for me as a writer.
What do you make, Jeffrey, of your writing career? Would you advise young people? I'm sure you get asked all the time about going in to the writing game, the business, especially fiction is a very, very competitive, very hard business to break in. Do you think you had a lot of luck? Are you just a naturally talented? As I said, your marketing blurb suggests there's only one Jeffrey Archer. Did you always know there was only one Jeffrey Archer, that you could essentially do whatever you wanted?
No, I was always wanted to be a politician. And so when I discovered I had a simple gift of storytelling, and that's the secret, I was a surprise. But then Proust reminded us we always end up doing the thing we're second best at. But to answer your question, yes, a lot of young people come to see me. And I say, go to the ballet. And they say, why should I go to the ballet, Jeffrey? And I say, watch the prima ballerina. Imagine how much work she has done to become the prima ballerina. And then look at the girls behind her who are on the stage and imagine how many hours they've spent just making sure they're on the stage. And then think about the thousands of people who would love to be on the stage who never make it. The figures are frightening, Andrew. You semi-hinted at them. There's 1,000 books sent to publishers every week, and only one gets published. There's 1,000 books that get published every week, and only one makes it onto the bestsellers list. There's 1,000 books that make it onto the bestsellers list, and only one that gets the number one. You are quite right. It has never been tougher.
And is artificial intelligence going to change all that? Will there be a future for writers? Will there be another Jeffrey Archer? Isn't
that frightening? The thought that they might just pump in my 30 novels and say, give us another one. I am told that's not possible at the moment, but I'm told in 5 years' time, almost anything can happen. I'm only glad that the arc I had, which is 50 years next year, that didn't arise, so it hasn't affected me. You are right, Andrew. It might well affect the next generation.
You've written many books, Jeffrey, many books. Everyone's read a Jeffrey Archer book. I'm guessing that Google or OpenAI can feed all your books into an algorithm and come up with a style. I'm sure they've already done it, or someone's thinking about doing it. As an author, this seems, for better or worse, to be unavoidable. But what should you get back? Should you be paid to have to have the Jeffrey Archer corpus fed into OpenAI or Anthropic or Gemini?
I've discussed it with my children, one of them who plays a great role in the film side of my books, and made it very clear that isn't what I want. I want to have left the books, leave it at that, and I don't want them to be bringing books out after I've gone, saying this is a Jeffrey Archer book. I think that's a cop-out, and I want nothing to do with it. So I repeat, Andrew, I've been very privileged, very lucky, and the arc of the 50 years may have absolutely suited me ideally.
It's interesting you talk about your children. Another very distinguished British novelist, 20th century novelist, John le Carré. After he died, his son brought out a le Carré style book featuring Carla and George Smiley and so on and so forth. It didn't pretend to be le Carré, but I think le Carré was comfortable with that idea. Could you imagine passing your mantle on, perhaps to one of your children or perhaps an admirer? Another Jeffrey Archer book, so there will be no end game. There'll be a new start after your particular end game.
It's interesting, when that happened, the Times wrote a very serious article about they didn't think this was a good idea, that parents should pass on to their children. The le Carrés have not been the only example, because there have been 3 or 4, Wilbur Smith, Dick Francis, there have been 3 or 4 who have done this, and the figures drop very quickly, because what you hit on, Andrew, is they have to be the same quality.
You mentioned Proust earlier. I suppose, Jeffrey, many people compare you with Proust.
Oh, no one compares me with Proust. I was saying that he said we always end up doing the thing we're second best at.
Yeah, I'm joking here, but do you consider yourself a serious novelist? Your books are very readable, but some people might suggest that they're airline fodder, the kind of thing you might read when you're sitting on a beach. How serious is your writing?
The Washington Post, which is not a paper to be underestimated, when I wrote Prisoner of Birth, said Britain has found the new Alexander Dumas. I rushed to my publisher and said, I want Britain has found the new Alexander Dumas on the front of every cover. And they said, no, we'll go with another winner, Larry King. So I think a part of the problem that you've just raised, Andrew, is that people who've read my books don't say that. My critics recently have been very, very flattering. And yes, I did suffer that at the beginning. And frankly, Andrew, storytellers suffer it. If you're a great writer and nobody reads you, you get wonderful crits. The sin is to dare to sell a lot of copies.
It's interesting you bring up Alexander Dumas. One of his great admirers was Ayn Rand, who was one of the 20th century's greatest selling novelists. I'm not sure everyone would agree that she's one of the greatest novelists. Of course, an extremely polemical one with her own view of the market and of freedom. Is there a Randian quality to your work? In other words, given that you began in politics and you have very clear ideas on what freedom is, what the market is, what democracy is, do you see yourself as a political writer in the way that Rand was a political novelist?
I think you've hit on something that can't be avoided, that we all have to do what we have a knowledge of. So my love of politics, my love of art, and my knowledge of, as a charity fundraiser, in being an auctioneer, creeps into every book. So, and I always say to young people when they come to see me, write about what you know about. Then the reader will go, wow, they know all about that. Don't do a horror story because they're in fashion. Don't do a sex story because they're in fashion. Don't do drugs because you think that will interest people. Do your own thing and the public will decide.
When I brought up Rand, you seem to be an admirer. Do you think, though, that the Randian qualities in the United States, what critics would call neoliberalism, has gone a little too far, that we do need government, that freedom isn't simply being free of regulation and central control?
Yeah, well, it's a very fair point. And we live in a very strange age when I would never have questioned democracy. But have you got democracy in the United States now? When I was a child, I never crossed my mind the Supreme Court could be political. Mind you, that's 60 years ago, and that the president could fix it and then get them to agree with his judgment. That hadn't even crossed my mind. And the fact that you don't have a leader of the opposition, so he seems to be trampling over everybody. And of course, that could change in the midterms next year. But if he holds on to Congress and the Senate, you've virtually got a dictator.
What do you think Mrs. Thatcher would think of Donald Trump?
She would have handled him very well. Don't forget what a very good relationship she had with Ronald Reagan. Of course, Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump are very different animals. They're very different human beings. But part of her genius was that she could handle Gorbachev. She could handle Chirac. She could handle Ronald Reagan. She knew what to do with each one. And you needn't kid yourself on that one, Andrew. If she was around at her best today, I would go as far as saying, I think President Trump would be in awe of her.
You've described your life as being lucky. What's the role of luck, Geoffrey, in the world? Do we make our own luck? Machiavelli, of course, famously said that fortune is a woman and you need to ride her well. How would you account for your good fortune? Your career in politics came to an end. For some people, that might have been an end game in itself, but for you, it was simply the first chapter in a remarkable life.
Well, it's a very fair question, and I would say in the case of Cain and Abel, I was very lucky to get on the Johnny Carson show. And for him to say it was among the best books, Cain and Abel was among the best books he'd ever read. But I found out years later, Andrew, that Gay Byrne, the great Dublin interviewer, felt the same way and had rung his friend, Johnny Carson, and told him. I found that out years later. So when you say, now that's an inch of luck, isn't it? You're quite right. That's that little bit of luck. But I guess most people can point to something that certainly helped them.
As you say, you got lucky with Cain and Abel. What advice would you give? I asked for advice about whether people should become writers. What about people who have some misfortune in their lives, as you've had? What advice would you give in terms of second acts? Fitzgerald famously, of course, said, perhaps the most incorrect thing that anyone's ever said about America, that there are no second acts in American life. If you do experience misfortune, how do you ensure a second act?
I think you've got to dust yourself down, admit you made a bloody fool of yourself, stand back up and go on fighting. And that does take courage. I got lucky in having a remarkable wife in Mary, a very strong family, and something equally important, very strong friends who remained loyal, not least the public, Andrew, who went on buying me.
The American political philosopher John Rawls has suggested that we all need to imagine that if we experience bad luck, we would want some sort of social safety net to protect us. Do you think he's right? Do you think that we all need to be a little bit more sympathetic to the unfortunate, to people who experience bad luck?
Oh, yes, ironically, this week, I've had a friend who's been sacked from a major job, and I've had a man who's died very young, leaving a wife and children. And you sit down and you think, my God, how lucky I've been, and I hope I've stretched out and tried to help both. And you will have had that, Andrew. You'll have had dear friends who've died. You'll have had people you admired who suddenly have lost their jobs or everything's gone wrong. And that's when loyalty comes in. That's when friendship comes in, because all of us face it in our lives at some point, and some of us don't always get the backup we need.
When you remember a younger Jeffrey Archer in politics, Jeffrey Archer who wrote Cain and Abel, how do you think you've changed? What would you disagree with that younger version of Jeffrey Archer? Well, we've talked about gerontocracy, but presumably you've acquired some wisdom over the years too.
I got in the House of Commons far too early, Andrew.
How old were you, Jeffrey, when you got into the Commons?
29. It was far too young. I recommend young people going into politics now, try and achieve something, and then go into the House of Commons with something to offer. I had nothing or little or nothing to offer when I entered the House at 29. I wish I'd entered it at 40. I've no complaints. Only a fool stands up and says, oh, someone else is to blame. I wanted to be a member of Parliament. I won a seat. I got in the House. It was fascinating to be in the House at that young age. And of course, I've kept my love of politics over a very long period, remain fascinated by a day-to-day basis. I'm following the French politics at the moment with fascination, the American politics with fascination, the Russian and Ukrainian politics with fascination, the Palestinian and Israeli politics, so much going on in the world, but I'm still fascinated by it.
Yeah, we had Macron on the show a few years ago before he became president of France. Do you think it's inevitable in the end that a popular front figure will win power in France and France will withdraw from the EU and it will become a dysfunctional organization? In other words, does the EU have much of a future, Jeffrey? Were you a Brexiteer?
I voted to leave, but I'm shocked by what you've just said. The idea of France leaving, I've never taken really seriously. They have a massive problem at the moment, having had one prime minister for 1 year and then one prime minister for 1 month. I think the next prime minister will last 3 days. If it's a new prime minister, he or she will last 3 days. And then Le Pen and the left will call for a general election. And I cannot see how Macron avoids that. If he's had 3 prime ministers in a year and he can't gain a majority for a budget, he can't even get a budget through the House, I think he has to resign.
And what would become of a Europe without the EU?
Well, I see where you're going. If France went, who else would go? Without France, it would be a very different organization, as it is without Britain. Though our own prime minister in Britain, Keir Starmer, is keeping very close contacts, let me put it that way, with Europe, and hoping to not go back, though I think in his heart he'd like to go back, but to make a stronger relationship between Britain and Europe. And in fact, that's what he's working on.
What do you make of Starmer? His polling isn't particularly impressive.
I've never seen a newly elected prime minister with a majority of over 140 collapse so quickly. Maybe that's the world we live in with TikTok and Google and all the other social media aspect. Maybe I'm just living in a new age which I haven't mastered. But he's very low in the polls at the moment, and Farage is leading the polls. And in France, I wouldn't be surprised if Le Pen was elected. In Germany, I wouldn't be surprised if a right-wing government came. And I don't know what's going to happen in Britain.
The subtitle of your new novel, Endgame, or at least on the front cover, is May the Best Man Win. It's a book about, or at least it has the background of the Olympic Games and athletics and sports. Do you think one thing that somebody like Starmer needs to learn from, he's a big football fan, are professional athletes? The politicians need to become like athletes. Mrs. Thatcher seemed intuitively to have mastered politics, but that was another age. One even wonders if she was around today, whether she would be the master or mistress of the process that she was 50 years or 40 years ago.
That's a very fair point. I've always wondered how she would have handled COVID. I've always wondered if that had been the center of her administration. She'd had the COVID year, so you have every right to say that. And maybe, Andrew, it's now impossible to govern, that you just can't win. Every prime minister in every country, every leader is going to be unpopular, and and by the way, I can't speak for America, but in Britain, top people are not going into politics. When you've got the chairman of Tesco before bonuses earning 4 times the amount the prime minister earns, without any of the unpleasantness, you can see that getting top people to try and help Great Britain PLC is not easy.
But does that even matter in the United States? The government's shut down, doesn't seem to be bothering anyone. You note that politicians earn minuscule amounts compared to people in big companies like Google or TikTok. But these are the companies changing the world, and politicians and politics and governments don't seem to have much impact anyway. So is the world recalibrating to tell a truth that nostalgists are simply not willing to accept, that politics doesn't matter anymore, or even government doesn't matter?
I wouldn't go that far, but where I would agree with you is even 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago, when I first entered the House, major multi-millionaires, now billionaires, major chairmen of companies, major holders of vast shares, didn't have real power. They do today. Mr. Musk seems to be able to talk to the whole world and tell my country, Great Britain, what they should do. That would never have happened when I was a young man. No American. You would have never got J.P. Morgan or Henry Ford saying, well, the British ought to get rid of this and do that. That would never have happened. So you're right. They have much more power than they've ever had before. And you're right also. I'm not sure it's a good thing.
We mentioned Nigel Farage. What's your take on Tommy Robinson? I was astonished that 2 or 3 weeks ago there was a 150,000 people march in London, which was organized by Tommy Robinson. Some people might suggest it was a fascist march, certainly overtly anti-immigrant. Are you astonished, Jeffrey? Britain's always been known as a generous place to immigrants, open, welcoming in many ways, from the Second World War, from other wars in the second half of the 20th century. Are you disappointed with a Britain that embraces a character like Tommy Robinson?
I think it was because we have so many immigrants coming over in boats every single day, and I'd say, go as far as saying a majority of the British are sick of it. The Conservatives did nothing about it. Labour, it's got out of control, and we are tired. Our immigration policy is a problem. By the way, it's a problem in France. It's a massive problem in Germany. And it's a problem across Europe. And it's a problem in Italy, because they can land in those countries as well. So I can't pretend I was shocked. But I was interested to see that Mr. Farage distanced himself from Mr. Robinson as far as he could get. He didn't approve of that much.
But are you personally offended by a character like Robinson, who is so overtly hostile to people who have had, we talked about bad luck earlier, Jeffrey. A lot of the people in those boats are people who haven't had the good luck that you or I or many other English people have had.
Awkward one, that, because at the end, I do believe in democracy. I do believe in the right for any man and woman to stand up and say what they want to say. And I believe that a decent, civilized country can handle that and take it within its stride. I'd be sorry to see us going against that philosophy. Therein lies dictatorship. Therein lies what's happening in Russia and China. And I wouldn't want to go down that road.
Well, let's end with post-Endgame. The new book is out, but you said you got one final book, Jeffrey. When's it going to come out? Do you have any idea?
I think it'll come out about a year today, so I'll be very happy to come and see you again, Andrew. I'm very excited about it. It's on its 17th draft. That's how much work I've been doing. And I still have, I think, 3 drafts to do, and I'm hoping that it'll be finished by Christmas and finally handed in which case it'll be published around September, October next year.
Any clues on what it's about?
Small clue. I was reading a brilliant historical non-fiction book on World War II, and I discovered that on September the 15th, 1941, the war could have ended. That could have been the last day of the war. But it didn't, because Hitler changed his mind 3 times. And Churchill was very aware that he changed his mind 3 times. But it could have ended that day. It's been well covered by distinguished historians. It's never, which I can't understand, never been touched by a novelist. And I've never been more excited about a story. I actually do believe it's bigger than Cain and Abel.
So is that a decision not to invade Russia?
No. You're halfway there, Andrew. Clever you.
Well, get me the other half, Jeffrey. If historians have written about it, it's probably no secret.
Oh, no, it's no secret. But what happened in the real world, Andrew, is we went to September the 16th, and then we had another 4 years of war. And so it got buried in a way, because it never happened. It got buried. And we moved right on to 1945. And by then, so much had happened. It became simply a part of history. What I think after my research is war could have ended on September the 15th, 1941.
Well, that's a wonderful idea. Jeffrey, will definitely get you back on the show. Final question. We had another British historian actually on the show a year ago who argued that the Second World War still hasn't ended, that we're still living in the aftermath, the final or maybe penultimate chapter of the Second World War, with Ukraine, with the Jewish question still in Israel. Do you think that the Second World War has ended? Maybe your final book, which is revisiting September the 15th, 1941, suggests that even in Jeffrey Archer's mind, World War II hasn't ended.
I'm really aware that those poor young people in the Ukraine, poor young people in Palestine or Israel who are sacrificing their lives, it could have been Britain. You're quite right. It could have been Britain in the 1940s, where in a way, although we're involved, you're quite right to suggest we're involved, we are at the moment onlookers, and it's a pretty frightening sight.
Well, I'm thrilled that Jeffrey Archer is not yet finally at his end game. His new book is called Endgame, and it's the final the final segment in the William Warwick novels, but he's got one more book in the works. He's on, what do you say, Jeffrey, the 13th draft or the 15th
on
draft?
the 17th draft at the moment.
I hope you're not using OpenAI on all this.
I don't touch it, certainly not.
Well, Jeffrey, we'll get you back on the show. Congratulations on the new book, Endgame, and I'm really excited about the final Endgame, your final novel. We'll get you back on when it comes out in the next year or two. Thank you so much.
That's